I leaned back into the old velvet chair, one hand curled around a mug of hot chamomile tea, the other slowly flipping through the yellowed pages of a vintage gardening magazine I found at a thrift store last weekend. Outside, the early November, sky above St. Paul hung low and heavy, as if winter was preparing to lay itself across the city in silence. A draft slipped through the crack in the window near the fire escape, brushing across the back of my neck. I pulled the blanket tighter, around my shoulders. Then my phone rang. The sound sliced through the stillness like a blade. I glanced at the screen. Dad. My breath caught. Not because I was expecting good news. I'd long given up that habit, but because some tiny part of me always held out for something different. I tapped speaker. "Hey, Audrey," my father said, his voice light, too light. "Just wanted to let you know, you don't need to come home for Thanksgiving this year." I blinked. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "What?" "We just think it's probably best you stay put this time," he continued, already moving past the words like they were nothing. "Mallory's been on edge lately. You know how she gets." Mallory, of course, my younger sister, the family's self-designated center of gravity. Whenever she was upset, the entire household seemed to reorient around her like she was made of glass, and they were terrified of breaking her. "So," I said slowly, "you're telling me I'm not invited? Because Mallory's having one of her meltdowns?" He sighed. That sigh, the one I'd heard my whole life, the one that meant don't make a scene. "It's just one day, Audrey. You'll be fine." I sat forward in my chair, the old wood groaning beneath the sudden movement. "Just one day," I repeated, voice flat. "You say that like I haven't wired you over $4,800 this year alone to keep that house warm." Silence. Not defensive. Not apologetic, just distant, like I was a number he had to subtract. "Don't bring money into this," he said finally, voice tightening. "You offered to help." I let out a short, hollow laugh. "Yeah, in January, when you called at midnight, saying the heater had broken down and the pipes might freeze. And in March, when Mom was crying on the phone because the furnace kept rattling. I paid the repairman, me again. And in September, when Mallory spent all her savings on that self-care subscription box business that went nowhere. Who covered the fall oil bill? He didn't argue. He just went quiet. Then came the predictable line. "Family is family, Audrey." I stared out the fogged window. Snow had started falling, quiet and soft, like the kind of snow that didn't melt right. "Away. She's been through a lot," he added, "and I haven't," but I didn't say that. I just let the silence sit between us like the cold creeping into the corners of my apartment. "If I'm not considered family enough to be at the table," I said finally, voice low, "then don't expect me to keep the furnace running either." I hung up before he could answer. The screen went black. The room felt colder, but it had nothing to do with the weather. The call ended, but the silence it left behind stretched longer than I expected. I stood there, phone still in hand, as if I was waiting for the words to echo back in a different tone. They didn't. The apartment stayed still, save for the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional groan of the radiator that barely worked. I set the phone down, slowly, like it was made of glass. My eyes wandered to the corner of the room, to the small shelf where an old photo still sat. Thanksgiving 2018. I was fresh out of college, working 2 part-time jobs, but I still took the 5-hour Greyhound to be there. In that photo, I'm smiling, holding a plate of mashed potatoes, sitting between Dad and Mom while Mallory pouted in the background about cranberry sauce. Back then, I thought showing up was enough to matter, but apparently, it wasn't enough anymore. The draft by the window brushed past again. I got up, made my way to the desk, and opened the laptop. I didn't hesitate. I typed in the login for the utility account, the the one I had created for them last winter when Mom said she didn't know how to handle all the online billing. One click brought up the payment history. Over $4,800 sent this year, and $2,400 the year before that. Quiet transfers, no questions asked, just expected. I scrolled to the bottom. The last entry, $400 sent 10 months ago for heating oil before the first snow. Not even a thank you text. I moved the cursor to the cancel autopay button. It hovered there for a while, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to take a moment, a real moment, to remember why I had done it in the first place. Not for praise, not for obligation. I thought helping meant love. I thought showing up meant I had a place. But love that's only visible when the money comes through? That's not love. That's utility. I clicked. A notification popped up. Your service will end on November 2nd, 4 weeks before Thanksgiving. Outside, snowflakes drifted down like they had all the time in the world. They blanketed the windowsill, soft but steady. I stared out at them for a while, hands resting on the edge of the desk, letting the quiet settle inside me like fresh snow on the sidewalk. In the garage back home, their home, were probably still the boxes of candles Mallory never sold. She had this idea to start a luxury aromatherapy line. She maxed out their credit cards, ordered bulk from some factory in Texas, and slapped handmade labels on each one. When no one bought them, they just stacked the boxes behind the water. Heater-like shame could be stored away, but no one got mad at her. No one made her feel like a burden. She's young, Dad had said. She'll figure it out. Meanwhile, I kept working overtime at the warehouse, lugging freight until my back ached. Mallory posted pictures of brunches and lattes. And me? I sent another $300 that month. Quietly, without asking. I returned to the couch, pulled the old quilt over my knees. The room still smelled faintly of cinnamon and tea. The kind of scent you make for yourself, not because anyone's coming over, but because it's yours, earned. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself feel something new. Not guilt, not anger, just relief. Because finally, I had drawn the line, and this time, I wasn't stepping over it again. The days after I canceled the heating service passed with a strange sort of weight. Not heavy like guilt. No, I'd carried that kind of weight for too long already. This one was different. It was the weight of unfamiliar stillness, of boundaries, newly drawn and not yet tested. I started waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because sleep felt different now. Lighter, but more alert. Like my mind hadn't caught up to the peace my body was trying to claim. I'd get out of bed before the alarm, pull on wool socks, and walk barefoot across the cold floor toward the kitchen where the space heater hummed like a quiet friend. There, I'd sip my coffee slowly, eyes resting on the window fogged over by the morning frost. November the 2nd came with no ceremony, just an email confirmation. Your automatic service for heating oil to 1160 Emerson Street has been successfully canceled. I read the words twice, then minimized the window. No music played, no dramatic gasp. Just me, in a small kitchen, in a small apartment, feeling more whole than I had in years. The temperature outside kept dropping. Minneapolis was heading into a colder season than usual. The forecasts warned of early storms, high winds, sharp freezes. I thought about their house, the house I grew up in, with its thin glass windows and poorly insulated walls. I remembered how the wind would whistle through the vents when I was little, how I'd tuck the blanket up under my chin and pretend the noise was just a song the house sang to itself. But now I wasn't part of that chorus anymore. I didn't smile at the thought of them cold. I didn't wish them harm. But I didn't rush to fix it either. That, more than anything, told me I was changing. The first message came 4 days later. Mom, Audrey, the heating system's acting weird again. Can you check it for me? I stared at it, then set the phone down on the counter. No reply. That evening, Mallory texted. No greeting, no punctuation. Just, real nice. Hope you're happy. I didn't answer her either. I didn't even open the thread. I just slid the phone across the table, switched it to silent, and picked up the novel I'd been reading. I let the words pull me away, sentence by sentence, page by page. On the 7th day, my father called. I let it ring. The screen lit up, went dark, then lit up again with a voicemail notification. I didn't listen. I just imagined his voice, controlled, but clipped, trying not to sound desperate. I knew that tone too well. Instead of picking up, I put on a scarf and walked to the bookstore on Central. I bought a secondhand novel and sat at the cafe next door for over an hour. The heater under the bench was warm, the waffles smelled like cinnamon and sugar, and no one asked me to explain why I wasn't somewhere else, fixing something someone else broke. 10 days in, a number I didn't recognize flashed on the screen. I picked up this time. Hi, this is Melissa from Twin Flame Heating. We were just wondering if you're planning to renew service for the house on Emerson Street. The account was under your name, and we haven't heard from the homeowners. My voice was calm, steady. No, I said. The contract was canceled. I won't be renewing it. I'm no longer responsible for that house. She hesitated for a beat. Okay. Just confirming. You're no longer covering payments? That's correct. I ended the call, stood by the window, and watched the snow fall in slow spirals onto the street below. By the time November 14th arrived, the texts came more frequently. Mom. Audrey, it's only 50 degrees inside. Your dad won't wear his coat, and Mallory's been coughing all day. Can you please call? Dad. This isn't about money anymore. This is family. Mallory. Fine. Just pretend you were never part of this family. Each message landed with the same weight. Urgent, accusatory, sometimes tinged with desperation. I read them all. I didn't reply. I didn't delete them either. I just let them sit there, a digital record of how the tides had turned. On November 16th, the season's first snowstorm hit. Minneapolis hunkered down under thick clouds and steady flurries. I stayed inside, wrapped in my fleece blanket, sipping hot cocoa. Outside, the wind howled and battered against the building, rattling the old window frames. But inside, everything was still, warm, quiet. I thought about them. Were they in the living room, huddled together under layered sweaters and worn quilts? Were they thinking of me, not as a bank account, not as a backup plan, but as a person? Maybe. Maybe not. But I wasn't waiting anymore. On the stove, a pot of potato and celery soup simmered, fogging up the window above the sink. I stirred it, slowly, the aroma rising around me like a quiet comfort earned one shift at a time. I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't hope they were suffering. I just didn't feel obligated anymore. That afternoon, the temperature dropped to 25 degrees Fahrenheit. I turned on the oven for a bit of extra warmth and poured a cup of cinnamon tea. Somewhere else in the city, I imagined my parents tugging at broken radiator knobs, and Mallory posting stories on social media about living in a freezer. Sure enough, later that evening, her update popped up. A blurry photo of her sock-covered feet with the caption, "Cold enough to feel like we're camping in Antarctica." Scrolled past, no pity, no anger, just acknowledgement. Yes, Mallory. That's exactly what it feels like. On November 17th, Dad called 12 times. I didn't answer a single one. Eventually, a message came through. Call me back. This isn't a joke. I laughed. Not out of spite, but from the surrealness of it all. For years, I was the one waiting by the phone. Now, suddenly, silence was my answer. That same night, Mallory posted again. A plate of instant ramen and a candle, captioned, "Dinner by firelight. Thanks a lot, sis." She still hadn't said thank you for the $400 in heating oil I sent 10 months ago. She probably never would. I turned off the phone, turned on my favorite playlist, old jazz tracks that reminded me of Saturday mornings when life felt slower, and curled up on the sofa. I read 2 chapters of the novel I'd picked up at the bookstore, pausing only to refill my tea. The room smelled like warm cinnamon and baked butter. The heater purred quietly in the corner. Every inch of this apartment, every quiet moment, felt like mine. Built with my time, my effort, my patience. And I realized something. I didn't miss them. Not really. I missed the version of them I used to believe in. The version that maybe never existed. And that grief. The quiet kind. The one that comes not with tears but with understanding. Settled beside me like a soft weight I didn't need to carry anymore. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I was chopping onions when the message came in. "Dad, if you still consider yourself part of this family, now's the time to prove it." The knife paused mid-slice. I stared at the words, the cold light from the window falling across the kitchen counter. Outside, the porch was buried under a fresh blanket of snow, the neighbor's car nearly hidden beneath its quiet weight. I set the knife down and exhaled slowly. That phrase, "prove it," echoed, more than it should have. After everything I had done, everything I had carried without complaint, now was the time I was supposed to prove myself. The day moved on. I made grilled cheese for dinner, the butter sizzling against the hot pan. The room filled with the smell of warmth and simplicity. My phone kept buzzing, more messages, more reminders of the house I was no longer part of. I didn't answer. I didn't even look anymore. I had finally stopped reaching. Thanksgiving morning came quietly. I woke up before the sun rose, the city wrapped in silence under a soft white hush. Snow clung to the balcony rail, untouched. No car engines, no footsteps. Just the wind. I brewed coffee, toasted bread, peeled a bright orange, its citrus scent cutting through the cold. I didn't cook a turkey. I didn't make mashed potatoes or cranberry sauce. I didn't want reminders of the kitchen where I used to stand between my mother and Mallory, doing all the chopping while they argued over centerpiece colors. By 10, I was on the sofa with a blanket over my knees, coffee in one hand, an old documentary playing quietly on the TV. The peace was almost surreal, until the doorbell rang. Sharp, repetitive, familiar. I didn't rush. When I peeked through the peephole, I already knew. My father. He stood outside, his thick gray coat zipped up to his neck, his cheeks pink from the wind, and his eyes filled with something I recognized. Not regret, but expectation. I cracked the door just slightly. Warm air spilled out onto the porch. He flinched at the contrast. "Audrey," he said, breath clouding in front of him. "We need to talk." I leaned against the doorframe, hand on the knob. "I don't think today's the right day to talk." "You cut the heat," he said, flatly. "The house is freezing. Your mother's sick. Mallory's locked herself in her room. It's 38 degrees in there." My gaze didn't flinch. "I didn't cut anything. I just stopped paying. Those are 2 different things." He frowned. "You know we're not good with tech. You canceled it, under your name. We didn't even realize until the house started dropping below 50. I handled everything for 2 years," I said, voice even. "Over $8,000 sent without complaint. And then, with 1 phone call, I was asked to stay away. Because Mallory needed the house to be calm." He hesitated. "Mandy's had a tough year." I shook my head. "Mallory always has a tough year, and I'm always the one asked to make it easier for her." He went quiet for a long moment. then said softly, "We have no money left. We've sold almost everything valuable. Your mom has a fever. We can't afford the oil delivery up front." I could feel the cold coming through the crack in the door, creeping up my arm. But I didn't move. "You told me to stay back," I said quietly. "I'm just doing what you asked." He looked past me into the apartment. The tidy space. The quiet. The warmth. "This isn't right, Audrey." "No," I agreed, "but it's honest." He stared for a second longer, then turned and walked away. His footsteps crunched softly through the snow until they disappeared. I closed the door, gently behind him, and for the first time in years I didn't feel cold. The door clicked shut behind him with a finality that didn't echo. It settled. Clean. Precise. I stood there for a moment longer, hand resting on the knob, eyes fixed on the space where he had just been. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no rush of justice, no cinematic swell in my chest. Just a steady, calm stillness, like I had finally stepped out of a conversation I was never invited into with sincerity. That weekend passed in a kind of emotional quiet I hadn't felt in years. I made soup. I listened to the jazz station on low volume. I caught up on laundry. There was no message from Mom. None from Mallory. For the first time, their silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. But then, on Sunday afternoon, the phone rang. Haley. My cousin from southern Minnesota, one of the few people from my family who never treated my boundaries like obstacles. I answered. "I just got off the phone with Aunt Claire," she said, jumping straight in. "Things at your parents' place are worse than I thought." I sat down at the kitchen table, wrapping both hands around a mug of ginger tea. Mallory moved out. Her boyfriend broke up with her. She's crashing on someone's couch in Eden Prairie now. Just a couple days at a time. She's burning through bridges like it's a hobby. I wasn't surprised. Mallory had always believed in second chances, but only for herself. "And your parents," Haley continued, her voice dropping. "They're staying at some cheap roadside motel off Highway 52. The kind with rooms you pay for by the week. Thin walls, no insulation. Your mom's got a mild case of pneumonia. Your dad, he sold Grandpa's old watch collection for a few days of heating oil." I closed my eyes. That watch collection had sat in the glass cabinet in their living room for as long as I could remember. Every time Grandpa came to visit, he'd open the case and tell us stories behind each piece. His first paycheck, his promotion, the anniversary gift he never got to give. It was the only thing he left behind when he passed. The only inheritance that held memory instead of money. Now it was gone. Sold for heat. "You okay?" Haley asked gently, catching the quiet on my end. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Yeah," I said softly. "Just a little sad about how it all ended." "I'm not," she said firmly. "You did the right thing, Audrey. If the only time people come to you is when they need something, that's not love. That's leverage." I didn't argue. She wasn't wrong, and I knew that. But the sadness didn't come from doubt. It came from remembering how hard I used to try. We talked a bit longer. About nothing, about everything. When we hung up, I looked at my phone, the screen now dark and reflective. My face stared back in the faint glow of the kitchen light. I didn't look angry. I didn't look broken. I just looked done. Done trying to buy affection with sacrifice. Done earning a place at the table that never really had a seat for me. The next day, I went to work like always. Morning shift at the distribution center. Pickups at the market. An almond pastry from the corner bakery. I wrapped a scarf around my neck and walked home beneath bare-branched trees, the wind brisk but not biting. Winter was settling in. But for once, I wasn't shivering. The messages stopped after that. No more missed calls, no new voicemails, no passive-aggressive texts from Mallory, no weather updates from Dad pretending to be conversation. Just a hush. A quiet so complete, it felt like the first clean snowfall of the season. I didn't dread it. If anything, I welcomed it. Every morning, I returned to the small rituals that now made up my life. The early shift from 7 to 3 at the distribution center. The familiar sound of the city buses outside my apartment. The heat rising from the sidewalk vents in little gusts of warmth. I started stopping by the local co-op for fresh bread and fruit. And sometimes I'd treat myself to a pastry I'd once deemed too frivolous. After work, I'd walk home past frozen fountains and shuttered shops, the whole world tucked into winter's rhythm. Some nights I'd light a candle, not a fancy, one like the ones Mallory once tried to sell, just something simple. Vanilla or cedarwood, something that didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. I no longer flinched when my phone lit up. Most of the time, it was Haley. She still called once a week. Little check-ins, slices of normal. She was the one thread I needed to cut. Her voice always carried a mix of dry wit and quiet loyalty that felt less like family and more like home. On our most recent call, she sighed into the phone. So, Mandy posted in one of the local community groups. I didn't respond right away. I just stirred the pot of lentil stew on the stove. She said she's looking for temporary housing, lost her job, talked about cracks in family support. She made herself sound like some abandoned charity case. I didn't sigh. I didn't even feel the usual flicker of frustration. I just turned down the heat on the burner and said, "That sounds like her." Haley chuckled. "You're different now. You don't even flinch." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. I don't have anything left to flinch for. The truth was, Mallory's stories didn't matter anymore. People could believe what they wanted. They could hear half the truth and choose to spin it as betrayal. I no longer needed the world to understand my side of things to feel grounded in it. Later that evening, I made tea and sat by the window. Snow was starting again. Light, almost shy at first, like it was asking permission to fall. The lavender, plant I kept on the balcony, was long dried out, but I didn't move it. Somehow, it felt like a quiet witness to everything that had come and gone. I pulled out my knitting, something I'd taken up on long evenings when I needed my hands to stay busy while my mind stayed still. The scarf I was making was nearly done. Earth tones, thick, functional, warm. I'd spent so many years trying to make everyone else's winters bearable. Now I was just making mine beautiful. That night, I went to bed early, wrapped in the same fleece blanket I'd brought home last year, when I'd still been sending heating payments to a house that never once turned on a light in my name. The apartment was quiet, peaceful, no door slamming, no arguments in the next room, no voices asking for more than I had to give. Just stillness. And in that stillness, I realized, silence doesn't always mean something is missing. Sometimes, it's the sound of finally having enough. Late January arrived wrapped in snow and silence. The city moved slower, blanketed in cold. Each morning, I watched the light stretch across my apartment floor, thin at first, then stronger, like it was remembering how to exist again. The radiator clanked softly, releasing bursts of warmth that made the windows fog up in sleepy circles. My routine didn't change much. Coffee at 6, work by 7, quiet evenings with a book or an old jazz record humming gently from my Bluetooth speaker. I started making soups from scratch. It felt good to stir something with patience. No rush. No one asking for a favor mid-bite. Just the sound of a wooden spoon against a ceramic pot. Mom hadn't called since Thanksgiving. Not for Christmas. Not for New Year's. Not even the generic holiday e-card she used to forward with the snowy cottage and blinking lights. That silence used to sting. Now, it just Was. Like a door I'd closed that no longer tempted me to open it again. Haley kept calling, though. Once a week, same time, usually on her way to the grocery store. Her voice always arrived like a little breeze of outside air. "She's still posting," Haley said one afternoon in early February. I was folding laundry, the scent of fabric softener still lingering on the sleeves of a wool sweater. "Mandy?" "Yeah." Complaining on some Facebook group about being pushed out by family drama. Asking if anyone knows of a room for rent. Says she's trying to heal. I didn't reply right away. I tucked the last shirt into the drawer, then leaned against the bed frame. "She's not looking for healing," I said finally. "She's looking for an audience." Haley gave a short laugh. "Sounds about right. She mentioned that Uncle Mark was trying to sell his old SUV to cover bills. Aunt Claire had moved in with a cousin in Des Moines to rethink how she raised her kids." Haley's tone was dry, almost amused. "Bit late for that, don't you think?" "Better late than never," I replied, though I didn't quite believe it. Some people don't change. Some just get louder when they're forced to sit with themselves. We hung up, and I went back to my evening, simple, slow, and warm. I sautéed onions for dinner, their scent curling into every corner of the kitchen. No one barged in demanding more. No one cried on the phone about bills. No one reminded me that love was conditional, and as I stirred the pan, I realized something else. I no longer thought about Mallory every night. I no longer opened social media to see if she'd mentioned me. I no longer drafted texts in my head that I'd never send. I no longer relived arguments looking for where I could have said things differently. What had once felt like a hole in my life now felt like clean space. Space I could breathe in. A space I had built for myself. Not to keep people out, but to keep myself intact. I didn't need to explain why I stepped away. I didn't need to prove I'd tried hard enough. My life didn't require commentary anymore. It just needed truth. Quiet, lived in, and mine. Later that night, I sat by the window, tea in hand, watching the street lamps glow against the frost. Somewhere beyond that light was the old house on Emerson Street. Cold, maybe still for sale, maybe still hoping someone else would fix the furnace. But I wasn't looking back anymore. The wind could knock at the door all it wanted. I had no reason left to answer. By mid-February, the sun began to linger just a little longer each day. The light still came cold, but it wasn't as sharp as before. Even the wind seemed to lose its bite, brushing more gently against the windows in the early morning. One afternoon, I stopped by the used bookstore on the corner. The owner recognized me with a nod. "Haven't seen you in a while," he said, smiling behind his scarf. "Braving the cold today?" I smiled back, quiet but genuine. I picked out a paperback about women starting over, stories of reinvention, of quiet resilience. It felt right. When I got home, I placed the book on the table, put a kettle on the stove, and lit the small fireplace in the corner. The flames cracked and danced against the exposed brick, casting soft shadows across the room. I pulled the wool blanket over my legs and sat back with my tea. Everything around me had been chosen carefully. Every item in this apartment had a story, a reason, a purpose. Nothing was just there because someone else needed it. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. Somewhere out there, I imagined the old house on Emerson Street. Maybe still listed online. Maybe no longer theirs. Haley had mentioned they couldn't afford to keep it, not with the mortgage, not with the heating bills, not with winter still clinging on. I pictured the kitchen where I used to do my homework. The table where my father read the paper each morning, the oven where my mother baked pies. In my memory, it all felt dim now. Cold, not ruined, just quiet, empty. A few nights later, Haley called again. I could hear wind howling faintly through her phone. "You're not going to believe this," she said, half laughing, half exasperated. "Mallory posted a video. She's crying, saying you abandoned the family during a crisis. Made you sound like the villain in some made-for-TV movie. I raised an eyebrow, though Haley couldn't see it. Did she mention the years I paid the bills? Not once, she replied. No mention of the money, the sacrifices, nothing. I gave a soft chuckle, not bitter, just tired in a way. That didn't ache anymore. Let her talk. People will believe whatever story makes them feel something. I love this version of you, Haley said after a beat. Solid, unshakable. Honestly, it's inspiring. After we hung up, I stood by the window for a long while. Snow was falling again, thick and soft, covering the dried lavender plant I'd never moved. The city glowed quietly under the streetlights, the world hushed in a way only winter could manage. I thought about that video, about how many times I used to worry what people would think, how many drafts of explanations I'd written in my head, how much I used to beg for understanding without ever saying a word. But now, I didn't feel the need to respond. Not to Mandy, not to anyone. Because when your life becomes peaceful, you stop needing to prove you're right. That night, I reheated the soup I'd made earlier in the week, the kitchen filled with the familiar scent of garlic and thyme. I ate, slowly, without checking my phone. No missed calls, no unread texts, just soft jazz in the background and the quiet flicker of the fire. Outside, the wind blew hard, but inside, I was warm. Not just because of the heater, not because of the blanket, but because this time, I had stopped giving myself away just to be included, and that, more than anything, was the warmth I'd been missing all along. March arrived with the first hints of thaw, just enough sunlight to melt the edges of old snowbanks, just enough warmth to let you leave the house without 3 layers. The air still carried a chill, but it no longer felt punishing. It felt like transition. One afternoon, I sat by the window with my journal open, a cup of lemon ginger tea cooling beside me. I wasn't writing anything profound, just a few lines, observations, reminders. I'd started journaling again, not to process pain, but to mark peace. I was learning that peace, too, deserved to be remembered. No new messages had come from my parents since Thanksgiving. No voicemails, no missed calls. And for once, that silence didn't ache. It breathed. It gave space. Haley still checked in. On our last call, she told me Aunt Claire had moved in with a distant relative in Des Moines. Uncle Mark had sold his SUV. Mallory, according to a mutual friend, had applied for emergency assistance and was couch surfing again. Still telling her version of things, Haley said with a sigh. Still leaving out the part where she told you to stay away. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. The story no longer belonged to me. Some nights I still dreamed of the old house, but the scenes were different now, less nostalgic. In one dream, I walked into the kitchen to find it, cold and dim. No one was there. No smell of dinner. No voices. Just the sound of wind pushing at the windows. In the dream, I didn't call out for anyone. I just stood there for a moment, then turned off the light and closed the door behind me. I wasn't angry. Wasn't even sad anymore, because what I had been grieving all along wasn't just a family. It was the idea of one. The illusion that if I gave enough, forgave enough, proved enough, I'd finally be allowed to belong. But you can't belong in a place that only values you for what you give. And I had given enough. That afternoon, I sat at my small kitchen table and flipped through a book I'd just picked up. Stories of women who walked away from roles that no longer fit. I sipped my tea slowly, the steam curling against my face like a soft exhale. The heater ticked quietly beneath the window. Outside, the streets were wet with melt, the sun catching on puddles like little mirrors. I thought about the version of me from a year ago, the one who stayed up late balancing other people's bills, who skipped meals to cover repairs, who kept checking her phone hoping someone would remember her birthday. That version had loved deeply, tried hard, but she'd also forgotten to leave space for herself. And this version, the one sitting in a sunlit apartment, warm, whole, and alone, wasn't cold. She was free. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do isn't to yell or fight, or demand closure. Sometimes it's just to live well, quietly, fully, on your own terms. As I finished my tea, I looked out at the street below. The city was slowly waking from winter, one thawed sidewalk at a time. I didn't know what spring would bring. I didn't have a 5-year plan. But I knew this much. I would keep choosing myself. Not out of bitterness, but because I finally understood that love without respect is not love at all, and I didn't need to be anyone's backup plan to feel whole.